So, welcome to the Results Rules OK podcast. My name is Dave Holland, and joining me today is a colleague of mine, Mr. Sean Chinnock, who operates in Luxembourg as a CTO or fractional CTO, specialising in the DORA regulatory field, which will be explained as we have a conversation over the next few minutes. So, Sean, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you.
And you? Yeah, you too.
So to kick people off, for people listening in, I'm interested about DORA, but first of all, could you give us sort of a 1 minute advertorial about you, your background, your experience, and what led you to this point of fractional CTO in the DORA world? What's your history and your experience?
Yeah, okay, no problem. So, I mean, I can slice my history into about three chunks. So, over 35 years, I started initially in the manufacturing sector. So, during that time, I was working for EDS, and my clients, they were in the automotive sector. So,
Right.
that I did about 10 years in there, and the last thing I did before I left actually was I implemented the largest SAP system in the world for its time. And so that was a fairly major project, but also, I was already starting to touch a lot of the aspects of DORA even at that time.
Right. Okay.
Um, then after that, I moved into the financial industry, still on the technology side, and I ran projects for Clearstream services for around 10 years, and pretty much touched all of the systems that existed there, and and running audits on most of the projects in Deutsche Börse, the mother company in Germany and New York. And then following that, I moved into the sales of technology,
Mhm.
still within Deutsche Börse Group, but I took
Mhm.
on all of the technology sales over a period of time, about 135 millions worth of revenue.
Wow.
So, that was running the connectivity, which was over 6,000 connections around the world, running exchanges for various companies, because obviously with Deutsche Börse, we had our own exchange company and software.
Yeah.
But that meant we also installed and ran that for, people like the Austrian Stock Exchange, the Irish Stock Exchange, Bulgarian Stock Exchange, etc. So all that business I was responsible for, as well as the hosting services that we ran out of Clearstream services in Luxembourg for companies around the world. Actually, I had companies as far away as Brazil that which we ran their hosting and managed services for. Which but they're all focused on the financial sector. So that was all about getting synergies in the financial sector.
Sure. So
So that
a
was me in a
broad,
nutshell before
broad,
I then became
broad
an independent.
background.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you have a husky dog as well. Is that true?
Yes, indeed. The family dog is a husky, indeed.
There you go. The highlight of the conversation. So,
There he is,
anyway,
yes. At least he would think so, that's for sure.
it's, social media is a strange place, isn't it? But there we go. Huskies and Beagles do well, but there we are. So, for people listening in, we're talking about sort of DORA. Now, I'm going to assume I'm not from financial services background. I'm going to assume some people know of DORA and a bit about it, but could you give an overview, a flavor? What is DORA? What are the implications, and what sort of stage is it all at right now?
Okay, so DORA's it's new regulation to bring more governance around technology.
Right.
So it covers a number of domains. So ICT risk management, for example, formalizing how risk management is done and bringing that into the overall risk management of the company. Because many companies out there, they don't cover the risk management of their technology processes
Mm.
within their overall risk management. Um, then you've got the incident response management. So again, it sounds fairly logical, but a lot of things are not being managed correctly within instance, within grading those incidents, and making sure that the reporting of that is done in a formalized way,
Mhm.
and in some cases even to the regulator for the highest and most important regulations. But then one of the more complex areas comes is the third party risk management.
Okay.
And so many people outsource, and then it's great, they're doing it, but they haven't necessarily got in place all of the contractual obligations that they need, and maybe because they haven't needed them before, their service providers are not necessarily actually capable at this stage of providing the services that will be needed under DORA. So it's not just about the financial institutions, it's about some evolution and change within the service providers as well. They need to improve their instant reporting themselves. They need to improve how they're providing services, service windows, service levels. I've talked to a number of them out there, and I've asked them what their service levels, their standard service levels are, and they've offered me service windows. I mean, so it shows me that they've got some evolution and understanding to do as well. And then, of course, there's the resilience testing, which obviously there's the people think of testing, they think of functional testing, but there's a lot more in the non-functional testing in terms of testing for disasters and business contingency, but also vulnerability testing and penetration testing. They start to become an obligation to be able to show these reports. And of course, you link this with third parties, and then you need to be able to get the same from your third parties. And and then with all of this is wrapped up with audit rights as well, to be able to audit and check your third parties as well as internally.
So this has all come about, I assume, because of the changes in technology and everything that goes with it. And when does it become, enforceable from? Is it enforceable now, or is it from the new year, 2025, or when's it all sort of become, if you like, regulatory law, if you like?
Right, so because it's an act, it was needed to be put into the Luxembourgish law. That was done in, so although it was known about prior to this, it was done in June, and it actually becomes enforceable as of January the 17th. So, for those that don't do it, they will be potentially at risk of fines from the CSSF.
Wow.
Obviously, I would imagine, it's up to the CSSF. They'll decide, but there'll be a certain flexibility over a certain period of time to get this introduced correctly.
So really, I mean, what's the 10th of September today, as we're talking? So there's, call it 4 months, I guess, with Christmas in between. That's not a huge amount of time, is it? And in your experience, I mean, I think you've touched on this anyway, in terms of being prepared for this, what's your view? How well are companies in general prepared for this? Are they ignoring it? Are they ready to go, or somewhere in between?
I wouldn't say they're ignoring it, but I would say that a lot of companies don't necessarily have the awareness of how much work they've got to do.
Right.
A lot of companies, they don't realize, they might consider that they've got just one contract for Office 365 or something like that. Some of the smaller AFMs, they don't realize breadth of, where this can touch in terms of subcontracting, in terms of, whether they've got a custodian out there and their IT, and whether they're providing the correct services that they need to around this regulation. So this act, so it's it's going to be challenging, I think, because they're going to find out at a certain point in time, and it's going to be a little bit late. I mean, I can tell you over the last week, the market seems to have woken up, which is a classic September. Sure. But it's nevertheless there's an awful lot of it, and there's an awful lot of scrabbling around to find resources right now, which will be one of the challenges. Is the resources, because it's not just about IT resources, it's IT resources with this type of experience. And of course, people can be trained up if they haven't had the experience, but it's not the same for everybody, so there's going to be challenges in, whether it's training up, upskilling people, or finding those resources is going to become challenging.
And these regulations, they apply to every company of every size, or is there sort of a limit on size and scope that it applies to, or is it everybody?
There are some limitations. So, DORA applies to authorized AFMs, for example, but not registered AFMs. So there is some of that, but even that adds another complexity, because NIS2, which we won't really get into today, is a very similar regulation, but it covers all industries. And so when DORA doesn't apply, you need to make sure whether or not NIS2 applies. Now, NIS2 has some revenue bands, etc. So, it depends if you're doing 50 million or something like that as to whether or not you need to apply NIS2. But NIS2 has a certain amount of similarities in terms of where it touches for cybersecurity, etc.
Okay. So there's no real escape from this. For a certain size and scale and scope of an organization, these are going to be sort of not imposed, but they're going to be relevant to them as we go along anyway.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think in the 50 million threshold, I don't think we're going to break through that for my company next year. It'll be close, but I don't think we're going to quite break through. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. You never know. You never know. And so this is, as you say, people are maybe sort of slightly underprepared for this, but it's happening, and there may be some flexibility in terms of the CSF taking a view on implementation, I guess. But that patience will tend to run out. And is this where your sort of idea came from for rather than you being a fully occupied, 100% employed CTO within an organization, this fractional approach to what you do? What's that mean? What's a fractional CTO? How does that work?
Okay, so it comes from a number of different areas. I mean, I, as I was, well, I didn't mention it earlier, but I was on the board of Clearstream Services for the last 5 years that I worked with them. I was also on a number of other boards
Mhm.
in the fintechs and regtechs as a part of the group. And subsequent to leaving, I've gone out, got my certifications with INSAED, with ELO, etc. And I even did the funds governance masterclass to make sure I'm relevant for that sector. But what I've realised is that sector's not necessarily ready for a technology person on the board.
Okay.
And there's certain pushes coming from the regulator, but I don't think it's. And there are certain people that do want technology people on the board. So I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
not at all in the sector, but I see that there's a certain pushback.
Mm.
And as I look at that, and I got into reading what DORA was about,
Mm.
and realizing that, well, actually, my experience actually covers all the requirements of DORA.
Right.
And with my board experience as well, I realised that that's where I could actually sell myself into companies where they need that support. And the
Yes.
thing is, with DORA, it needs that support from a certain seniority that
Yeah.
the companies are not going to want to give a full-time contract to somebody like me. Plus, if they did, many of them I would be bored. So I needed to get that balance in between, and that's where I started marketing the fractional side of it. But
Yes. Okay.
indeed, that's a very challenging thing to market because the interesting thing is it's not something that's very familiar to people.
Yeah.
Certainly,
Yeah.
I mean, it's even it's I'm not sure where it came from, whether it's the state side that they started
Mhm.
this fractional executive, but it's certainly less familiar here in Luxembourg. And so I find myself educating a lot of clients as I go about
Mhm.
fractional. But if basically a fractional person is where you're just buying maybe 10 hours a month of somebody like myself
Right.
who has, but it's from somebody that's a very experienced, a senior person.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
fractional roles are typically fractional CEO, CFO, CTO, CMO, CIO. They're almost C-level type roles where they're being offered fractional. So it's people that have held a CEO. Like I was CEO of Impendium Systems in the UK at one point, and any C-level roles, etc., that I've held previously, being able to offer that experience to
Yeah.
especially to smaller companies, to help them grow and help them.
Yes.
And then when I look at DORA, it really applies a lot because they need to grow and upskill, as I say. And I notice most of my companies that I'm in at the moment, they're very pleased and grateful to have somebody that has that experience. So I think it's certainly getting some traction in
Yes. Okay.
Luxembourg, but like I said, it's something that needs a lot of selling all the time.
I think it's slightly unusual, but I think you're right. I think over in the States and maybe in the UK, the sort of fractional approach to consulting, I think maybe within marketing and certainly in accounting and finance as well. But now on the technology side, maybe it's new, but it sort of fits. So somebody could say to you, for example, we've got a mid-sized company. You could put a program together where you're there for, I don't know, 2 hours a week or a morning a week or a day a month or whatever it is, and you will sort of flex that around whatever they need then. Now that could
But
change over time, I take it, could it?
yeah, indeed. So some, to give you an example, I mean, I'm a fractional CTO for one AFM, but another AFM, I'm more just covering a fractional general executive for them, which
Right.
is, covering a number of different aspects, not just the technology aspects, so
Sure.
it very much depends on a case by case as to how they want to handle it, so some of them may want me because they can name me to the CSSF, and things like
Yes.
that. I'm known to the CSSF. I was registered with them when I was on the board of Clearstream
Okay. Yeah.
5 years, so that it is something which is of use to them. And being a Luxembourg resident is also useful to them. It's
Yes. Okay.
which also is necessary, I think, to be able to cover the multiple clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's sort of a vote of confidence. But I suppose the kind of thing where it's derived from is the people with, as you say, senior experience can
Yeah.
sort of thin slice themselves, but give access to companies that couldn't ordinarily not just afford, but didn't have the full-time position requirement of somebody with your skills and experience. And you can thin slice it down so you can look after multiple companies as you go along. And just again, just in your experience, from a DORA perspective, what is it? Is it sort of front loaded with a lot of activity in the first, I don't know, 6 months, and then it sort of tapers down afterwards, or how would a program look for working alongside you?
Well, I mean, obviously, they need to do an analysis and go through the gap analysis phase to start with. So that's for me is one of the key aspects at the beginning. A lot of them are choosing to go to a big four, a named consultancy to do all that work, and that's fine by me because that's quite a bit
Oh,
of work involved in the analysis.
yeah,
But then after that is where it becomes a little bit challenging as to how they want to implement it. Many want to implement it on their own or consider it easy enough to implement on their own, which
sure.
could be fine. It depends a lot on the size of the scope. I mean,
Sure.
I've seen certain clients with about 1,000 contracts to be revamped,
Wow.
which is, obviously, I can't name any clients, but
No,
that's a
sure.
fairly major company where
Yeah.
there's others where we're talking maybe 5 contracts.
Right. Okay.
So they vary enormously, and the complexities of implementing them vary enormously. There's some when it comes to contracts, there's some challenges that they need. They always take time. But
Of
on the
course.
other hand, where I can, I like to try and get synergies. So I go to providers and ask them, well, what's your plan?
Yes.
It's because we can push in one direction as a client, but I would expect providers to have a plan because they've got multiple clients.
Yeah.
So if they're a smart provider, they're going to want to give a template to all clients. But it's a choice, and that's a challenge which is just facing, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely. But this is
So I
all
think,
sort of happening in, well, from say January January the 17th, it all kicks off, and there will be a sort of bit of delay. But as you say, this is becoming more urgent right now. So if I'm sat in Luxembourg as a CFO, CEO of an organization somewhere, and I'm aware of DORA, I know there's some gaps. We need some help and support. And it may be that the fractional CTO is something to consider. How would I, or how would anybody out there listening to this recording? What's the best way in contacting or connecting with you?
well, I mean, obviously, I work in pretty much as my clients like. So, I mean, I work in all messaging services, all email services. But the easiest way probably to reach out to me is through LinkedIn because
Right. Okay.
they'll see my profile on LinkedIn and just reach out to me with a message on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And that's the easiest way to go.
And you don't bite or anything like that. It's all quite painless and
Ah,
straightforward. No injections or anything.
depends.
Depends who they are, doesn't it? Depends who they are.
You never know. You never know.
Okay, so are there any? I mean, thank you for that. I mean, it is very interesting from my perspective, understanding Luxembourg as I do. This is something reasonably new that has to be taken on board. Are there any little final couple of pointers or couple of tips that people should be really aware of before they sort of reach out to you, or is the first protocol is have a coffee and a chat with you and discover it all?
I think it's just a straight coffee in the chat because what I find is giving pointers to the clients. They all have a different view. They all have a different need, actually, as well. So, talking to them first of all is always is just the most important thing to do to really understand where their pain point is.
Yes.
Because they vary a lot, and so whether I'm the right one or whether or what service they need from me, that's something which we just need to talk about really and just see from there.
Fabulous. Well, what I'll do when we publish the video on the platform is what I'll do, if it's okay, if I'll sort of tag you in the
Yeah,
text below the
great.
post so people can easily find you and reach out and have a coffee chat. And but you must bring the husky to the coffee chat. That's the deal, I think, because
Yeah, maybe he's a challenging dog. He's always pulling left, right, and centre. He loves people way too much.
absolutely.
He's definitely, huskies aren't guard dogs, that's for sure.
No, they're not. We had, well, they're beautiful creatures on there, but they're not the aggressive type that you sort of stereotype think they would be. They're
They
lovely,
lick
independent.
strangers to death. It's
Absolutely. Anyway, fabulous. So, Sean, thank you for your time. I hope that's been interesting for people listening as well. For people listening, please contact Sean Chinnock. The link will be below in the thread. And my name is Dave Holland. You can connect with me as well. Hope you've enjoyed the podcast. Sean, thanks again, and
no
we'll
problem.
see you around. You're obviously very visible on LinkedIn, and everybody else, please watch out for the next podcast. But for now, we'll call it a day and go and enjoy the autumn rain and the cold, I suppose. But anyway, Sean, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Take care.